Hi there, it's Mark, and welcome to episode 5 of Adobe Photoshop for Photographers, our series of video tutorials looking at developing your Photoshop skills with a photography bias. And today, following on from last week, we'll be looking more at gradients and specifically developing that. I'm going to have a coffee here. Developing that into color grading. So what is color grading? Color grading is the art of stylizing your picture, for want of a better word, using colors, whether you're changing shadows and highlight colors, or whether you're doing a monochrome type or indeed black and white. So there's lots of different ways we can do this in Photoshop. So we're going to major on the gradient editor, and we're going to be looking at gradient fills too. So if that's something that interests you, stick around. And don't forget to click on that subscribe button. Oh, speaking of which, I've been learning more about making videos for YouTube and special effects, and I've been working on this one. It's taken quite a while to program, but I should be able to get some titles to appear in shot. There they go, and be able to magically move them across the screen without giving any game away about how it's done. If there's time, I'll show you exactly how that's done in Photoshop. In videoing, you can even get it coming from the side and come down the screen. It's marvellous what you can do. Play the titles. So these are the 4 pictures we're going to be working on today, and they're all available in the zip file, and the link to that zip file on my website is down below in the video notes. You may need to click on the tag which says show more to expand the notes to get access to it, but it's there. Go and click on it, download them, get them into Photoshop, and we shall begin. Let's apply a gradient map to this picture and start playing with it to see if we can understand how it works and what it is doing. So the gradient map lives down here in our adjustment layer toolbox, and we're going to click on gradient map. And on face value, when I saw that, I thought, what's going on? Well, to help me explain, bear with me while we'll make 1 or 2 little adjustments. Click on our gradient map, choose from basics this one which is black to white, and click OK for now. We've applied a gradient map that runs from black to white on top of our background layer. Oh, while we're there, hang on, I'll just right click and make my thumbnails a bit larger for you. Now this is an adjustment layer. I haven't taken a copy of my background layer, even though that's really good practice, because I know here I'm not actually going to be changing the layer. We're just looking at adjustment layers here. So in no point does any pixel in this background layer get changed. As is the case with Photoshop, when you look at a picture, you look down through the layer stack. And when you have an adjustment layer, the adjustment is carried out pixel for pixel against the underlying layer or layers that are visible. Here we are taking the darkest color, which just happens to be black, and we will change this in a minute just to demonstrate this, and we're applying it to the background layer such that the shadows and below in the background layer are overlaid with the darkest end of this gradient. The highlights and above are overlaid with whatever the lightest color of this 2-tone gradient map is, and the midpoint of that map from black through to white is what is used to map onto the general exposure or the mid-tones of a picture. So essentially the darkest color is applied to shadows and below on the picture, the lightest color is applied to highlights and above on the picture, and the midtones are your general exposure. Let's choose a different map. So clicking on my actual gradient map brings up the gradient editor. In the editor you should find something called legacy gradients. Within legacy gradients there's one called photographic toning. And within photographic toning, there's a sepia one I tend to use, which I think is that one, sepia 5. Sepia Antique, sorry, Sepia 5 is the one before it, yes, Sepia Antique, and I click OK. Now, this doesn't look as dark over here, but the darkest value of our gradient map is applied to the shadows and below. The lightest value is applied to highlights and above, and the tone that is in the middle is applied to our mid-tones, our general exposure. Now in this particular instance, the blend mode normal is not our friend. I find that some of the better blend modes for gradients are in the overlay section, and within the overlay section I tend to like soft light because I'm being gentle in what I'm doing here. And you can see now how we've moved away from something which was a bit more harsh and in your face, albeit we could have left it like that and then lowered the opacity, but it's still kind of creating just a wash of sepia. But if that's what you want, that's great. But by using the soft light, it's got more subtle interaction here. It's not washing out all the highlights so much with the colour that was at that end. And again, we could then use opacity to taste. But there is mileage in normal, depending on the gradient you've chose, if you're trying to do a monochrome, so to produce a single tone colour to represent what would be black and white. However, that's not where we are on this particular edit. Soft light. Now when we clicked on our gradient map, at the top of this explanation there was just two stops. There was a black and a white, but here there is a third one. Now remember when I said the darkest colour of your gradient map would affect the shadows and below, and the lightest colour would be your highlights and above, and your mids, well, this is where on this map we can actually alter that. So I can bring this up. So effectively I'm taking a darker colour into the midpoint, a darker tone into the midpoint, and therefore the overall picture here is getting darker. I'm going to put it somewhere north of where it was, or actually east, I suppose, if we're using a compass, but not as light as it was, and I'm happier with that. Now as it's an adjustment layer, we can come in here and click on our mask, which is currently white, which says allow every single pixel change that this is going to apply to how we view the background layer through. We can go B for a brush tool, D for default colors, X to get black as our foreground color, make sure we've got a nice soft brush, and we could choose now to paint on here to remove some of that tone. So I'm just going to take off the wall of the harbour here, not for any creative reason, but just to demonstrate that yes, it's an adjustment layer, and keep reinforcing these messages. If you want to see what effect your masking has done, well, the eye switches off and on the layer, but if you hold on your shift key and click on a mask, it switches off and on the mask. So now you can see what your mask has done on the wall of the key side there. I think I called it a harbour earlier. It's a key side. Okay, so that is the gist of it. There are many gradient maps to choose from. Loads work really well with monochrome, and the ones in the photography, in legacy, in photographic toning, you can get some remarkable results from those as well. And the advantage is you can just click around, see what they do to your picture real time, and then you can also play with the stops. We're going to do a little bit more of that in a while. So let's pop on to picture number 2, which is inside, which cathedral is this? This could be Durham Cathedral, and it's a typical example of a picture I will take where I don't want to hang around too long. I know I can recover things. Sometimes I'll look at pictures, and yes, great to get straight out of camera. I like getting things straight out of camera with minimal editing, but sometimes, you know, I'm not that precious. I'll just rattle off some pictures and I'll play with them. That's how I learn. And over the years, I've learned to know what can and cannot be done if I don't have the luxury of waiting to get everything set up properly. And this is one of those examples. Now here we are actually going to change this because it's not quite straight. Control or Command J, C for my crop tool, click in there, just to the side. I just want to straighten that up a little bit. My mild OCD tendencies tell me that needs to be straighter, and press enter or click on the tick mark. And I want to add a curves adjustment, which we met in the previous episode where we looked quite closely what curves would do. And I'm going to take a midpoint and pick it up a little bit to brighten this, but also then pull back down the highlights in there, I think. So before and after, just to recover some of that. And I think that's a little bit more strong for what I'm trying to do here, so I'm going to bring that down. What am I trying to do? Now that would be a good question. When I saw this and I saw the light coming across, it's obviously from up here, some windows, and it's coming through the pillars, and it's hitting the floor and running up like this. And that pattern cascades down through the aisle here. What I wanted to do was bring some of that colour into around the top of this side of the picture. So to do that, I'm going to add, not a gradient map, I'm going to add a gradient. So what has a gradient done? Well, in this case, let's just look at some of the options. This is linear, radial. Okay, we get this now. So radial is obviously radial, as in a radial adjustment you'd find in Lightroom, and linear is, like it says, linear, so it's gone from one end to the other. Angle, what does that do? Okay, well that changes the direction that this linear gradient is working from. So I'm going to leave it up there for the moment. Bearing in mind what I said about having some sort of glow up here to match a colour that's down here. And if I click in the gradient, I'm back to our gradient editor. So we could actually choose anything. Currently it's colour to transparent, which means it will apply this colour. Now this time it's nothing to do with applying a colour to overlay the dark or applying a colour to overlay the highlights and the mids. This is applying a colour from a particular place running to another place depending on the gradient you chose, radial, linear, whatever. So here it's applying this white colour to the top left, and as we run down through the gradient it becomes transparent. So there is not another colour there, and somewhere in the middle we start to run out of this overlay, and you can see it happening as we come down. So what I want to do is I want to change this colour. So I'll click on it once and I get my colour box, click on it again and I get my colour picker up, and I'm going to choose a colour that's there in my image down here, and it's put that colour in, except I want to make it a little bit richer and darker. Click OK. So I'm trying to get a picture. I'm trying to get a colour that is complementary to what we see down here, and I'm going to click OK. So what have we done so far? We've had a colour to transparent gradient, linear gradient, nothing to do with the underlying picture and the tones on it. It's gone from top left down to bottom at an angle of 40 degrees there, and I'm going to click OK. These tags around the outside of the picture, because my crop tool is still active. Now I'm not going to be using it, I'm just going to hit B for my brush tool because it's a little bit distracting having those around the outside. So here's my gradient. I'm now going to change the blend mode to possibly soft light again, switch it off and on, and you can see how I've put that colour cast. I've warmed the top up here to kind of match the natural hues that have happened with the light coming and hitting the stone floor. So that's one way we could do a gradient. Let's add another one on the same picture. Gradient. Let's add a radial. Let's scale it down to, yeah, that's a little bit much, but we'll work with that. and it's currently color transparent, so let's go and change that color again, and let's pick something a little bit in that yellow theme or the orangey theme, a little bit brighter. Click OK, click OK again and again. Put this in soft light. Oh, hang on. Yeah, we'll go for soft light still. And this one is just a little bit more gentle, and it's adding a glow coming in through the window and out. So before and after. And so that was a different way of working with gradients. Fundamental difference are a gradient map will map to the underlying tones in your picture, regardless of where they are. A gradient maps in a direction. It transitions from a point to another point, subject to whether you've chosen radial or linear, whatever. However, if we just jump back in here for a second, you can still choose gradients which have got more than one point on them. So if we do something silly like put this rainbow effect in there, you can see how it's got lots of different points, and those points, possibly some homework for you, you can actually click to create a point, go in there and then choose a colour to go in there. We could really mess with that rainbow by putting an extra green in there. So you still can come in. It doesn't have to be white to transparent. You can still use the full editor. You can add points, delete points, and so on. I'm sure in some world this edit would work. Possibly, I don't know. If you had oranges and yellows around a light, you might have a bit of a light flare going on there. Anyway, that was just a bit of silliness. But the point is, you can edit all the individual points. The point is, you can edit points. There you go. Within the gradient editor. Next picture, please. Oh, am I back? Must be time for some high quality graphics. Seamless. Carry on. Let us continue our journey of color grading here, but we're not going to be using the gradient map or the gradient adjustment tool. I will be using a couple of other tools in here, and we've seen them before. I am going to be using a curves, so let's put that one in. And I am going to be using a new tool to us, which is called the channel mixer. So let's put that in. We'll not touch them just yet. First thing I want to do is address the fact that this does not look symmetrical to me. So C for my crop tool, and I'm going to bring the side in so that it clips the edge of that light the same way as we do on this side. I'm going to bring the top down a little bit, and then I'm going to get rid of the distraction of the window that's underneath. And what I want to go for here is a silhouette type picture and play with some of the colours in those lights. So I think I'm quite happy with that crop. I will click to save. Now the channel mixer. The channel mixer is very good for doing some black and white changes. In fact, if we go to the defaults, there are a lot of default black and white settings in here already, which are based on the underlying colour of blue, green, orange, red and yellow. So you'll find that these will stylize differently according to the amount of those colours that are already in. But I'm just going to reset that with the reset tool, because that's not what we're going to do. I want to use these sliders because they will affect the underlying colours to adjust the reds, greens and blues. So I'm going to go red first. So as is usual, let's sweep it from one extreme to the other to get our eye in to what it will do. Doesn't that look nice? Okay, I'm rolling this back to about 128. Now I know that is tinted a lot of the lights, but we haven't finished going through the channels yet. Let's see what we can do with greens. Let's run those back and up And I think I'm going to leave the greens around about 36, 38, something like that. And blues, let's run those up and run those down. I like how that's making a bit of a contrast in there. I'm going to go around about 50, I think. So off and on. Yeah, I'm quite happy with the tones, the colour grading that's added to those lights. Let's play with a little bit of contrast now. Again, I swipe my faders left and right to extremes to get an understanding of what they're going to do. And I think somewhere around about 6 or 7 is okay for me. Now what I don't want is I don't want that actually on the bottom half of this picture. So I'm going to click on the mask, because they all come with a mask, and I'm just going to paint that out. Now one quick way to do that is to come over here and click on your gradient tool. Yours might already have, for example, the paintbrush there, so just click and hold and choose the gradient tool. Now this is going to put a gradient. In this case, what we want up here is, in the basics, we want black to white. We want a linear gradient, that's a radial gradient. We want a linear gradient. And if I hold, I'm on the mask, if I hold down my cursor and just move this up a little bit, oops, it's moved the picture. Hang on, Control 0 to move it back. You can see how it's put the gradient here. It's a very tight gradient, it hasn't gone nicely from black to white, it's quite severe. If I wanted it to go nicely from black to white, I would do that, and you can see over here how it's far more gentle. But I'm just using it as a quick way to fill in the bottom of this, so I'm just going to put a tight line on. And yes, it's a gradient, but probably only just, and it stops that effect being applied to the bottom half of the picture. So I'm happy with that so far. Now the curves. I'm not going to do what we've seen previously on curves, where I'm going to adjust the actual curve bar itself. I'm actually going to raise the black point. So if I click here and raise the black point, you can see the overall picture gets darker. And it doesn't take a great deal to do that. But I'm also going to lower the white point in contrast. And by doing those two simple changes, I've made more contrast in this picture. What I want to do as well is take some of the greens out in the lower half and add a little bit of magenta in there, because I think it's more harmonious with the lighting we've got. So we can do that with curves. So let's bung another curves on. I could do it within the same curves tool, but I'd rather separate them. So this particular curves tool we use just to add contrast. So I'm just going to contrast curve, and this one I'm going to call add magenta. And how do we add magenta? We go to the green channel and we add greens, but we can also take greens away. And when you take greens away, you add magenta. We discussed this on the previous episode where we looked at tone curves. So if I just slide this down a little bit, I'm adding magenta. Unfortunately, it's impacting my lights above. I don't want them to do that. I just want it to impact the lower half of the picture. So guess what? We've got a gradient tool. I've got a mask. If I just come and draw this mask down this time, I've just effectively filled in the top half black, and in doing so taken away that magenta from that part of the picture. So let's just switch them all off and look at before and after. So we've added a little bit of color grading with a new tool called Channel Mixer, and we've seen how we can use a gradient as a quick way to do block fills with certainly rectangles or diagonals, up or down, left or right, on our adjustment layers mask. We're going to be using that technique in the next picture. So let's go get the next picture, and our final picture for the day. And it's this one. This is North Pier at Tynemouth. But before we start, I've just realised I made a mistake on the previous picture. I'm not going to tell you what it was. It didn't spoil what we actually did, but if you notice it, stick it in comments and tell me. Okay, so North Pier at Tynemouth. I don't like the fact that only part of this post is showing here. One of the things you should do regularly if you're cropping your pictures is just check your edges and check your corners to see if there's anything in that is a little bit distracting. So I'm going to crop to remove distractions here. So Control or Command J to take a copy of my background layer. C for my crop tool. I'm going to crop down to get rid of that blue bar at the top. I'm going to crop up because I want to make it symmetrical and have that lighthouse right in the middle. And then I'm going to bring in from the right hand side to remove that post, but I'm going to bring it in a little bit further to get the lighthouse in the middle, and then I'm going to click OK. I'm much happier now with the way that is looking, so Control or Command 0 just to fill it back into screen. Alright, what I would like to do with this is just subtly change the sky a little bit to get a little bit more of the tones from the sea into the sky. And I don't really want to bother with having to intricately mask anything. So what we're going to do is B for our brush tool, hold down the Option key or Alt key on a PC and just click to sample a colour from the sea, and it puts that colour as my foreground colour. You can see that over here. I'm now going to introduce a solid colour adjustment layer, which we've seen before, and that will inherit the foreground colour, which is why I picked it. I'll just click OK for now. I'm going to change this into the blend mode of colour, which we've also seen before, and in doing so this is instantly a really good colour grading tool for doing monochromes. If I double click on the solid colour picker, just moved out the way a little bit, and I'm going to do Control C just to remember this number here, the current colour, Control C, I can now move this anywhere, and at real time on screen I get to see what it's doing. And so I can now tint or monochrome any picture using this technique, and it's non-destructive, and you can go back in and revisit this. Control V to paste back in the original colour and click OK. So we've set that colour to match the sea. It's too strong, so I'll roll it back, but not yet. I'd rather have it strong so I can see what I'm taking away from the picture before I then roll it back. That should become apparent in a second. Click on our mask, go to our gradient tool, and we're going to do the trick we did before. We've got black and white gradient, we've got linear gradient, and if I now draw a line here, we introduce that mask, but notice how it's far too strong, deliberately so I might add. You can see right across the wall and the pier. So I want to really feather this. I'm going to do something like that. Still impacting top of the wall, so let's give it another go, and you can do this as many times as you like, and that's a bit better. And now because it's feathered, it's only slightly impinging on the top of these posts, and I'm not actually going to bother masking those out because the overall thing's too strong. I want to roll it back with opacity. And before and after, if you look in the sky, this is subtle. If you look in the sky, you will see, particularly around here, the clouds and the breakthrough blue there, you'll see that we've actually done that. But you can use the similar sort of techniques for other things. Let's put a general darkness on with curves. So let's bring the overall picture down a little bit. And let's go to our mask. And let's go to our gradient tool. And let's go to the radial version, and let's click and drag out, and you can see how it's put a feathered mask in there, which has effectively put a vignette on it. So if I switch this off and on, you'll see the outer of the picture darken. So overall before and overall after, and that's it. That's all the extra bits I wanted to show you on gradients. So far in this series we've looked at layers and layer masking, layer blending with blend modes, we've gone into retouching with dodging and burning, adding textures, frequency separation, tone curves, we've done gradients and colour grading, none of them in its entirety just enough to introduce the tool, show you some tips, tricks and techniques, and let you sail on your way. We've also looked at channel mixer, gradient maps, gradients, solid color adjustments, levels, my memory's failing me, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue and saturation, color balance, and black and white. Next episode we'll pick up this theme of still doing color work, and we'll look at color matching between two pictures, both with some of the new tools in Photoshop and old school. We look at color changing, so we might pick a dress or a car and we'll completely change the color of it. And then as the series moves on, we'll do photo filters, selections, blend if, filter gallery options, blurring options, actions, and composites, and then Q&A. Which brings me to the fact that if you do have any questions now, don't wait till the end. Stick them in comments and we'll answer them, and see if you can remember, see if you can spot what that mistake was that I made, that I'm keeping stum about. And that's it. All remains for me to say now is, if you like these, please do consider clicking on subscribe if you already haven't. If you have, don't click on subscribe because you'll switch it back off. Ring that bell to be notified of future episodes, and please give this a thumbs up. It takes seconds and it improves the chances of my videos being seen by other people in searches in YouTube. It really does help out. And that's it. I'm out of here. I'll see you next time for the next one. Bye for now.